trick is to look at the kind of thematic questions you've raised in Act 1. For example, in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, early in the story, sings Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which of course is a song about what home is. And of course, the whole movie is about trying to get home and defining, what home is. And certainly in Act 2, Part 2, where she has to go to the witch's castle and she has to make the choice whether to save the Scarecrow or to throw water on the Wicked Witch of the West, which kills her, is the kind of horns of a dilemma and a kind of changing experience which again will allow her to appreciate and have the strength to get herself back from Oz. What else do I want to say about this section? Well, without it, as I said before, you will not have a third act. Now, again, working with these other levels of conflict. So, in a movie like The Godfather, Michael is hiding out because he has just killed 2 men. And he has much time there to revisit the traditions and the traditional world that his father came from. And some of the theme in The Godfather, as we remember from that famous scene later in the movie where Don Corleone says, why did it have to be you? I wanted you to be a senator. Is one of the questions Michael asks when he gets back in Act 2, Part 2 to Sicily is, where are all the men? And he finds out that they have all been killed in these mob wars. And it really makes him take stock of the seriousness of the situation and this conflict about, what kind of man are you? Because the belief system that seems to accompany the answer to Michael's question is that this is okay, that these men died for a good reason. No one says, stupid men, they all get themselves killed. On the contrary, it's with respect, and there's a respect for this tradition. And so certainly a theme in The Godfather is, what is a man? And you have to remember that Michael has gone away to join the army, and he appears at the family wedding in his uniform. And that late in the story, in Act 3, he remembers back to coming home from the army and sort of being ostracized because he wasn't one of the guys. He had picked a different war to fight. And so this whole issue of going back to the old country and seeing that it was a tradition that men died for this kind of family war, I think is part of what changes his thinking and makes him want to, become a man in a more traditional sense. So part of what's important to understand is that in this section of the movie, Act 2, Part 2, is really where you do get to explore some of the more thematic and philosophical information that you want to, should that be of interest to you. Certainly, in Witness, he has to really confront the idea that violence is not a necessary part of life, and he sees this as he lives with the Amish and he does the barn racing, and he sees that, these men, again, if another question in that movie is how do you define yourself as a man, these are men who define themselves by a quality of nonviolence, the very opposite of everything he's ever known. And so, once again, he has to rethink who he is as a man. In movies like Working Girl, and I hate to say that I'm hard-pressed to think of movies in which women really have this much of a kind of moral choice, she has to decide what she's willing to do to win at business. Is she willing to become, a lie and a cheat, like her boss? Or is she going to stand to her own moral standard, which ultimately she's forced to do? And so whether your character is male or female, the idea that there is a display of an alternate moral reality is another way for you to consider how to use Act 2, Part 2. A few closing remarks on Act 2, Part 2 is that it is a bit like a mini-movie, as I've said, and you can only get here to understand what Act 2, Part 2 will be once you have defined Act 2, Part 1. So this whole issue of, outlining a movie and nailing it down and then executing it, while it's a very, very important idea, it's important also to remember that once your characters really become alive, and you've heard many writers, Neil Simon apparently would come home and after a good day's writing, and he'd say to his wife, about whatever character he was working on, like, you'll never believe what so and so did today. And I am always thrilled in my classes when a writer comes in and says, well, I tried to have this climax on Mount Rushmore, but my character just has vertigo, and I just, if I want to keep the character, I got to move the set piece to something that's below sea level. I love it when writers begin to understand that once they create a beating heart for their characters, their best laid plans may go awry. And that's part of what Act 2, Part 2 is about. It's to give them the writers and their characters a chance to really explore some of the material that's come through in working so closely together for the beginning part of the script. Now, this is not to encourage any form of schizophrenia. This is to encourage, however, a healthy imagination in which you, the writer, can imagine that the characters are speaking to you. I'm not in any way encouraging you to actually hear voices in your head. That's a whole different subject. We don't want your life to turn into a beautiful mind or something like that. But as a work of imagination, it's very important to imagine that you yourself have the capacity to speak directly to your characters.